Having a problem here, Jim. Hold on a second.
No rush.
Oh, okay, well, let me close this and try it one more time. Well, there was a worldwide blockage yesterday or Monday.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, we're in business. All right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 333 of Humanity Rising. Very good to see you as we all traverse this pandemic that started in the spring of 2020 with a commitment to stay the course for as long as the world was subsumed in a common experience around COVID-19. Today, we want to focus our attention on the Conference of Parties, number 26. That is coming up starting November 1 to November 12th. And we want to have as our guest, Rupert Read, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. But before we dive into our program, let us pause, as we always do, and just take a moment, just a minute or two, and center ourselves in our bodies. Take a deep breath and attune ourselves to our hearts. Let us just take a minute to attune to our hearts and listen to our heartbeats in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that we're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to just recall the meta theme that has been guiding Humanity Rising over the last several months, and that is the last report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that says that humanity is now in unprecedented territory, which the Secretary General said means essentially we're in code red for humanity. climate scientists from all over the world are saying that we are now in the tipping point. We're no longer heading into something that can be avoided. We're now in it. And that means that we are now being caught up in escalating, increasingly turbulent and lethal climate change, in the face of which our governments and the civic institutions around the world that we have relied on to ensure stability are no longer capable of doing that. We're seeing it with the pandemic. We thought originally this was going to be rather short-lived and we were going to return to normalcy probably by the summer of 2020, then the fall, and then the beginning of this year. And this pandemic is still with us, with variants that are moving faster than our vaccinations. And there doesn't appear to be an end in sight. And that's just one indicator of the kind of world in which we now find ourselves. And the most important thing that we can do, either personally or collectively, whether a nation or as a planet, is to take in Code Red. There was a group that emerged initially out of the UK in 2018 called Extinction Rebellion. That, if I recall correctly, I was in November of 2018. Around that time, exploded into the public domain with a series of well-orchestrated and impactful forms of direct action to call attention to the world public and to the governments that the time to act is now. And I think it's worth just recalling the observation that Martin Luther King made during the 1950s, 1960s, when he was at the front lines of direct action and civil disobedience in Birmingham, Alabama, and different parts of the United States around civil rights. He said that the purpose of direct action is not actually to solve the problem. That comes later. The purpose of direct action is to dramatically, and with all the force that nonviolence can bring to bear, to put our bodies on the line in a way that compels public attention, so that through the direct action, you can prick the conscience of humanity, as he put it, to wake up to the reality of a higher moral law. And that's what happened with Extinction Rebellion. And over the last couple years, the consciousness of humanity has been quickened, even as the situation in which we find ourselves has worsened. We're very privileged today to have one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, a gentleman who emerged as one of their principal spokespersons as the rebellion took shape, Rupert Read. He's a professor of East Anglia University. He's been an active campaigner in the Green Party and the environmental movement for many, many years. He's specialized in the precautionary principle and climate change. He's written a number of books. The one that I read first of his was that This Civilization is Finished. His more recent book is Facing Up to the Climate Reality. And he will be joining us as we prepare for COP26, November 1 through 12. He's being credentialed for the COP, so he'll be both inside and outside. And during the 12 days, November 1 through 12, Rupert and colleagues there in Glasgow will be beaming into Humanity Rising with daily reports, issues of controversy, and also on the outside of the COP, engaging in various forms of direct action. So Rupert is going to be playing a very important role over the next 6 weeks as we prepare for what's being called the most important COP in history. Rupert, welcome. I also want to note that Shelley Alcorn, our Chief Operating Officer, is joining us. She'll appear later on in the program. She's been the one, as you all know, who from time to time just reports on Humanity Rising of current events and climate-related issues. So she'll join the conversation a bit later. But Rupert, welcome. And where I'd like to start is, why don't you just tell people a little bit more about your background, how you came to develop such a passion for the environment, some of your activities pre-Extinction Rebellion, and then how you experienced the genesis of Extinction Rebellion, and then we'll take the conversation from there. But welcome.
Jim, thank you so much. What a lovely way to start. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Great, great. All right, I'm going to take up your delightful invitation, and I'll go back further than I usually do, given the way that you introduced me there, and just say something very, very briefly about my childhood, because I think that's really where it all began for me. So I remember my first ever political demonstration. I was about 8 years old, and I went with my aunt to a Save the Whale demonstration back in the day when that was the big campaign, a campaign which is still hugely important. It's become almost cliched, but it's so vital that we look after these most amazing co-inhabitants of the earth, the whales and the dolphins. I'm writing about them actually in my new book, which will be out next year, called Why Climate Breakdown Matters, and it's got this amazing piece of art of a whale on the cover, which I've just been approving the final copy of, so it's on my mind a little. And also, what was very important to me as a child was spending time in nature. So I grew up in London, but I spent quite a lot of time, due to the good fortune of really of where my family, my parents came from, in the Lake District in northwest England on one hand, and Devon, southwest England on the other. I spent quite a lot of time in Devon, on the coast there, and in the moors there, Dartmoor, known to some of you perhaps from Hound of the Baskervilles, for example. And even more time in the Lake District in northwest England, which is really a little piece of heaven on earth, as many American visitors over the years have testified. The home, of course,
testify to that.
Right, okay. The home, of course, of the late poets, famously William Wordsworth and Coleridge, who are, in my opinion, really, really important figures in the history of the last several hundred years. Who their romantic philosophy deserves to be taken a lot more seriously than it typically now is, I think. And that time, especially that immersive time in the Lake District that I had up on the mountains there and in the rivers and lakes and so on, really kind of formed me for life in a fundamental way, I think. I sort of, again, kind of won my environmental spurs in a small way as a child by spontaneously clearing up litter in the Lake District. I couldn't stand the garbage that one found around the place in various places. So I just started clearing it up, and then my family sort of joined in, and then I got a little award from a kids' environmental charity for doing this. So that's the kind of deep background. Zooming forward a bit, I did my degree at Oxford. I took a first in politics and philosophy, studying alongside Boris Johnson, among others, and which we could talk about perhaps on another occasion. And then I went to America and spent 7 years doing my PhD at Rutgers in New Jersey. And that really radicalized me environmentally because, well, as many of you will know from bitter experience, the environmental damage in the States is in many parts of the States is really severe. I was in New Jersey, and I just was astonished by the extent of the chemical pollution there, for example. So I got involved. I put my toes into the radical direct action movement, Earth First, and also animal rights activism. I came back to Britain to work in academia in the UK, and that was when I got very involved in the Green Party. Eventually became a elected Green Party councillor. The Green Party, not super strong in the UK, but stronger than it is in the US. Stood for Parliament and so on. Never quite made it into any Parliament due to the rubbishness of our electoral system in the UK, which is basically the same one that you have in the US. And then things took a further turn for me, really, starting about 5 years ago. By this time, I was writing a lot of environmental political philosophy. You mentioned kindly some of my books there. But the big turn for me was around 2016, really, when this idea that this civilization is finished just kind of flashed into my being and wouldn't leave. And that marked a further kind of step towards, as we put it in our book, facing up to climate reality. Further big step towards that. I suddenly realized it's not going to happen in the way that people think. We're not going to make this kind of seamless transition and just carry on. It's not going to be like suddenly everything's running on renewable energy, but otherwise everything's the same. That's not how it's going to be. What's going to happen is either that our civilization collapses, or that we make a much more radical transformation, that we actually embrace something about who we really are, which is present to many of us through spirituality or through nature, that we decide to relocalize our societies and relocalize our world and really make ourselves at home again on this planet and in the particular places where we live. These are the kinds of things that are going to need to transform now if we're going to avoid collapse. And the chances of us doing that, frankly, don't look very good. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Of course, we should try. And in any case, we need to soften our potential landing if there is going to be some kind of collapse. There's lots that we can do to prepare to make that less bad. So that takes us to about 2018. I'm giving these talks about, with titles like "This Civilization is Finished." I'm pretty nervous about giving these talks at first because I'm worried that people are going to say, "Oh, this is terrible. You're giving up on humanity. You're giving up on this civilization, etc." Which, of course, is completely untrue. I'm the last person to give up on humanity. What I am saying is that this civilization as we know it is not going to continue as we know it. The only way we get to carry on having a civilized future is by transforming into a different kind of civilization. And around that time, I find out that a few people in the west of England are starting to form an organization called Extinction Rebellion. And they're saying very much the same as I'm saying, but there's a difference. They've got a kind of a plan. And so when I found out about this, I was impressed. I was like, "Oh wow, okay, yeah, that's what I've been hoping to get, an actual plan of what to do about it." So I got involved with them. I joined them, and I helped them to launch publicly through the Guardian newspaper and through an event in London at Parliament, where we occupied Parliament Square and blocked the access for vehicles to Parliament. And that was, as you say, October 31st, 2018. And that was when Extinction Rebellion sort of started to make the attention of the world. That was also the day I first met Greta Thunberg, who was in London to support us for that launch event. And from there, as you say, we went from strength to strength. And in April 2019, we had a 2-week occupation of the centre of London by thousands of us, and thousands were arrested. And it changed history. It changed climate consciousness and eco-consciousness in the UK forever. And some of the ripples were felt elsewhere in the world, especially as, of course, Extinction Rebellion is by no means limited to the UK. Extinction Rebellion is also very active in the US, in Germany, in France, and so on and so forth. So yeah, was that what the kind of thing you were after?
Sure, sure, sure. Let's talk a little bit as we start here around the utility of direct action and in relationship to Extinction Rebellion. And in the spirit of disclosure, I had my first direct action in the Clamshell Alliance in the United States that was trying to shut down the Seabrook nuclear reactor in Massachusetts, and went on from there. There's a certain, I think, power in direct action, and I think Extinction Rebellion is one of the examples in modern history of where what Martin Luther King said was the essential point of direct action actually happened in a way that had an impact both locally and globally. So I would love to just to have you just share with us your sense of the utility of direct action. Maybe describe the activity in which you engaged there at the launch of Extinction Rebellion, and also, you know, how over the last now 2.5, 3 years now, how has that gone? Is that something that we need to continue to do with a concerted focus? Because I also obviously want to move into the more moderate flank discussion, but let's focus first on the power of direct action.
Yeah. So we started, as I say, by this action outside Parliament. The next month in November, we occupied 5 bridges in central London for several hours. And so we sort of ramped things up over a sequence of actions over months. In April 2019, as I say, that was the big one. That was the first full-scale London rebellion, where we held space in the centre of London for nearly 2 weeks. And that was the one that was really transformative, because we were there for nearly 2 weeks, we forced a national conversation. It couldn't be avoided. It couldn't be just kind of railed at and then dismissed. And what kind of happened, basically, my understanding of it, my reading of that little bit of history, was the first few days there was a lot of opposition, a lot of anger in the press, and so on. And then as we persisted, people started to kind of look a bit more deeply. Well, why are all these people?
When you
doing
say,
this?
wait a minute, let's go into some more physical detail. You say you held space. What did you actually do? Just call that up into people's memory. Did you occupy buildings? Did you shut down Trafalgar Square from traffic? What actually did you do?
Yeah, so in the April 2019 rebellion, what we actually did was we occupied 4 iconic areas of central London and stopped through traffic in all of them for nearly 2 weeks in most cases. One was at Hyde Park Corner. Another was at Oxford Circus. That's where we had the famous pink boat that's now become famous, where the symbolism obviously was, look, if we don't radically change direction, these streets are going to be flooded. And that was a very, very inspiring place to spend time, because people they took this boat to heart, and wave upon wave of rebels kind of surrounded this boat and subjected themselves over the course of several days to arrest, and the boat was still there, The third location was at Parliament Square for obvious reasons. And the fourth location, which was actually my personal favorite, was at Waterloo Bridge. And what happened at Waterloo Bridge was the road was blocked to vehicular traffic, but cycles and, of course, pedestrians could get through. And the bridge was taken over by people planting planters there, and there was a little skate park and so on. It was kind of showing what the future could be like, you know, and it was a beautiful place. It was really literally a beautiful place to spend time. So that's what happened there, and that was the most crucial moment in Exile's history, certainly in the UK. And if I was advising anyone who may be on the call or maybe listening later, how you might do things in the US or wherever, I would say there's quite a bit to learn from that, but it would be different in the US context, partly because the US is a federal state. So you could imagine the same kind of thing as we did in London happening in any one of 50 places, it seems to me, in the US. And that makes it maybe a bit more manageable. You don't have to think, right, so we have to try to repeat in Washington, DC what they did in London. No, I think it could be just as good to do it in the state capital or even in places like San Francisco or Los Angeles, which are not, because the capital in California is Sacramento, right? So XR had an even bigger rebellion in October of that year, and has carried on since. I've now moved on from XR because I think that although its work is still valuable, I think its real historic task in the UK has been achieved, of kind of ripping open the window of what's perceived as being possible. And as you implied, I've now moved on to seek to energize a wider movement that will include people who are not up for engaging in full-on illegal activity, let alone getting arrested themselves. But I would urge anyone who's kind of feeling a bit scared about what I've said so far to consider that actually, as you implied, Jim, nonviolent direct action is a wonderful thing, actually, to take part in. It's immensely empowering. It gives you opportunities for experiences of togetherness and human collaboration, which basically in our society you virtually never get in any other form of life. It is prefigurative. It is, if it's done well, regenerative. So if you're kind of thinking, well, I just want to do this kind of more moderate stuff because nonviolent direct action sounds kind of too scary. Actually, when you do it, yeah, of course it can be scary, but the main things it is are thrilling, enlivening. I mean, I've never felt so alive as when engaged in anti-nuclear and then more recently climate and ecological direct action. And never, that's not an exaggeration. And I bet you would say something similar, Jim.
Yeah. When you put your body down and say, here I stand, I can do no other, there's a certain vitality that just permeates every cell in your body, particularly when you do it en masse. Then like Extinction Rebellion, it really has an observable effect in the public
when it
consciousness.
works, that's the best of all, when it works.
You had the perfect storm.
So I'm on trial later this month for so-called criminal damage for taking action against climate change deniers in the UK, and that's a bit scary. I've never faced getting a fine or possibly prison, although I probably won't get any prison. I'll probably just be a fine. Never faced anything like that before, but it's so worth it. So worth it. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Yeah. That's just on a kind of personal basis, let alone in terms of what you're actually achieving and the contribution you're making.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's turn to this recent essay that you wrote about the importance of the moderate flank. And by the way, everyone, that's when I reached out to Rupert, was when Shelley sent me that. I guess it was a blog that you wrote about the assessing Extinction Rebellion over 3 years now, and coming to a conclusion that it had a very important effect and benefit, but it was now important as we go into a deeper layers of the climate crisis to really start to activate the moderate flank, as Rupert called it, and one of the strategic frames of our partnership going into the COP, November 1 through 12, is how do we start to think about bringing the moderate flank, as it were. It would be sort of Humanity Rising, Global Regeneration Corps, all kinds of organizations out there that are dealing with the climate issue, but not engaging specifically in direct action. So Rupert, talk to us about the evolution of your thinking and how the moderate flank and if we could pull it off, a conjoining, an alignment between the direct action and moderate flanks are important for this particular moment.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Great, very important question. So this particular moment, and we'll come back to this, is to do with the COP and also to do with the more general phenomenon of the post-COVID reset. It is such a vital moment in human history, it really is. So yeah, what I came to believe over the last 12, 18 months is that in countries where there has been a significant shift in consciousness already, where room has been opened up. In the UK, that certainly happened with the Extinction Rebellion. In some European countries, it's happened with Extinction Rebellion, but more with Greta Thunberg and the climate school strikers. In the US, it's happened with both and with Standing Rock. But I think that the most significant phenomenon, probably, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm not obviously living in the US anymore. I think the most significant phenomenon in the US in recent years in terms of radical flank style movements has been the Sunrise movement, which I think has really shifted the agenda significantly. Without the Sunrise movement, I think it is unlikely that the Biden administration would be anywhere near where it now is on climate. Don't get me wrong, I think the Biden administration has hopelessly inadequate plans and is dangerously in hot to fossil fuel interests. But believe me, it would be a lot worse if you hadn't had Sunrise kind of pulling things in the right direction. So my thinking is, in countries like ours, there's still room to go. Like I say, I think that a full-on kind of Extinction Rebellion type thing in many US states would be really good, really healthy. But there's been enough movement already, I think, that there is space that has been opened up for something that isn't quite traditional environmentalism, but doesn't necessarily need to be going as far as the likes of Extinction Rebellion either. And this is what I refer to as the moderate flank. I put my latest essay on the moderate flank, which just came out today. I put it in the chat a few minutes ago. And what does this mean? So what it means is we need to be aiming to do enough. We need to aim higher than traditional environmental movements and organizations have done. We need to be more honest and frank about how dire the situation is, which has been a trademark of my own and of Greta's and of XR's in the last few years. We need to be genuinely inclusive. We need to make sure that we're inclusive of people with different political views. We need to make sure that we're inclusive, to generalize from that point, across the ideological spectrum, because this is an issue of such kind of scale and urgency that we can't afford to exclude potential allies. We need to be inclusive in ways that are not always, therefore, comfortable. We need to be inclusive also in terms of, and this is obvious from what we've already said, in terms of not only saying that the rebels who take things very radically are the authentic voices of the movement. We need to make sure that we're open to people who are not able or willing to be arrested, but who are willing to give a lot. And when I say give a lot, I mean give a lot of money, give a lot of time, give a lot of your life, give a lot of your energy. That is what the situation requires. So the moderate in my moderate flank, it's not like kind of centrist or, sort of Bidenist or Obamarist or something, right? It's moderate relative to the Sunrise Movement or relative to Extinction Rebellion. So it's moderate relative to something which is pretty radical. It's not pulling back on any of the kind of aims of where we need to get to, but saying, can we find a way of doing this which is more genuinely inclusive, and that pulls on all of our talents and availabilities and resources? So yeah, potentially Humanity Rising is definitely part of that. And I've been involved in the last several months in helping or launching a number of organizations in the UK which are trying to fit this bill. And I think this is crucial now to where we're at. The paradox is this, Jim. This is a key way to see it, I think, as we go into COP. The issue is so urgent now. The situation is so bad that we need to operate at scale. And that means that we can't stick to a radical flank approach only. We need to be getting far larger numbers of people involved in change in their workplace, involved in change with their identity as parents to the foremost of their minds. I'm thinking here of my book, Parents for a Future, which I know some of you on the call have already read, and which I think is my most important book. We need people to get involved in their communities in distributed ways, in building resilience with a real eye on the severity of what's coming, and an understanding that our leaders are not riding to the rescue at COP. COP is not going to produce a deal that magically solves everything. That is simply not going to happen. So yeah, that's the motivation for the so-called moderate flank. Moderate relative to those, such as Sunrise and XR, who have changed the game and have made it possible, I think, for a lot more people to step up and really make themselves counted at this key moment in human history. And what we have to do now is turn that possibility into an actuality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, we've put it in Humanity Rising, is that it's time for radical collaboration.
Yes.
It's time for all of us who have the same analysis, whether you're Extinction Rebellion, Humanity Rising, Global Regeneration Corps, Donut Economics. I think people have the same sort of radical analysis, radical meaning they're looking reality in the eye and realizing that we're in code red. And then the question is, what avenue, what domain do you want to be active in? And how do you more effectively collaborate in a higher order, I would say, strategic formation? Because if you imagine, if all the climate organizations in the world were coming together in the same, like a shoal of fish or a flock of birds, we would optimize our impact by several orders of magnitude. And it's the fact that we aren't cooperating, we aren't collaborating intentionally at this moment, is what constitutes a major part of our predicament. So you're right, in my view, to be bringing this notion of the direct action and moderate flanks together, because that's at the heart of how Humanity Rising was even structured beginning in the spring of last year, and to be able to go into the COP with you there in the COP is a very exciting opening of possibilities, Rupert. I just want to acknowledge it. I think there will be a lot going on in the COP. And why don't you spend a few minutes just sharing with people, since you're going to be there, what do you think is at stake? What do you think within the realm of practical politics, given where the governments are? Taking, for example, the recent statements even of Boris Johnson, who seems to have, at least in terms of his rhetoric, been saying some important things. What do you think is the likeliest outcome?
Yeah, well, as I hinted a few minutes ago, I think what one should not expect is that the COP is going to ride to our rescue. It simply isn't. It's a system which is largely a failed system in terms of rising to the full extent of the challenge. And that isn't to put down the great work of many people who've been a part of it. That isn't to put down, for example, the astonishing achievement of the Paris 2015 climate agreement, a remarkable diplomatic achievement that the French, among others, should take a lot of credit for. But anyone who's read my work will be aware that to think that the Paris Agreement puts us on course for safety is already a gigantic delusion. Yeah. And things are worse than that because we're not keeping up with the Paris Agreement. And what comes out of the COP in Glasgow, I'm afraid you can be confident that it is not going to be as good, even as what was already in train at Paris. So what can we hope for? Look, any way that the COP can actually be made better in terms of its outcomes is good. So it's worthwhile in the next few weeks, if you have a way of doing so, you know, writing letters to the papers, writing letters to your Congress people, whatever it is, doing direct action perhaps. It's worthwhile putting pressure now on government, on leaders, on the media, wherever you are in the world, to try to make this agreement that is coming less bad. But it is not going to be a good agreement. It is not going to be enough. So another part of my argument is that a key thing that we need to do is prepare to tell that story, to help the world to understand that our leaders are failing us, that the system is failing us, that the British government, Boris Johnson et al., are failing to do what is necessary to really make the COP work. And that the agreement that comes out at the end, it could be bad, it could be terrible, it will not be good. Bad is a lot better than terrible, right? It's worth trying to create a bad agreement as opposed to a terrible agreement. But a key point that I'm making is we need to be ready to tell this story throughout, and especially at the end, because the end is going to be the moment where it's really visible to people. What have they actually done? What have they actually come up with? And they will try whatever they come up with. They will try to say, look how wonderful and shiny this is. Everything's going to be fine. We need to be telling a different story, a more truthful story about the COP climate conference and about what they produce at the end of it. That is a key task for the next month and a half. And I'm hoping to be an important player in that, and I'm certainly, whether or not I am that, I'm hoping to be with you on part of that journey. And I hope that we're going to reach a large number of people to help play their roles in that. Because as I say, the key date in the COP process for me is the end, November the 12th. It's not the start, it's not the middle, it's the end. And at the end, we need to mark their failing us. We need to mark it by what we do on social media. We need to mark it by what we do in talking with other people. Crucially, we need to mark it through the mainstream media. We need to mark it in terms of what we actually do. So I will be there on the ground in Glasgow. But if you're in Glasgow or in London or at your state capital or in Los Angeles or San Francisco, there is something that you can do in person, in the real world, at your government office, at an embassy, at a TV station, whatever it is, to say they are failing us, and we're not going to let this go unmarked. And this is the moment when we understand and we make clear to the world that we're not just kind of trusting our leaders anymore to sort this out, because they're not going to do it. And that will be clear to those with open eyes by November the 12th. So the way I see it, it's about a much larger movement than has been present so far in Extinction Rebellion or even in the school climate strikes, starting to come into being. Parents realizing that leaders are not riding to the rescue of their children. That's going to be crucial. And for people henceforth to demand more, but also to seek to act directly to make better happen. You said earlier, Jim, that direct action, according to Martin Luther King, its purpose really is to call for what needs to happen and not to manifest it. But there is also a form of direct action which is about direct manifestation. And I think that too, we need to call into being more from the middle of November onwards. That's part of what I mean by transformative adaptation. We have, as I said earlier, to transform our civilization, and we're going to have to adapt to the climate damage that is here and the climate damage that is coming, because it is too late to prevent it, and it's too late to, they're not going to do enough to slow it down enough to stop there being more and more of these disasters that we've seen over the past few years. The unprecedented wildfires in California, the unprecedented heat dome across most of North America, the unprecedented floods in Germany, the unprecedented wildfires, not wildflowers, in Australia, if only there'd been wildflowers. There's going to be more and more of these events. Our governments, our leaders have already in effect decided that they're not going to prevent them, because if they were going to prevent them, they would have acted decades ago. Yeah. So it's partly about moving directly through our workplaces and through our local communities to make change happen on the ground, much more at a much more serious scale. I believe that while on the one hand, as you say, Jim, what we need partly is to join up these various diverse efforts, and that's partly what this moderate flank idea is about, through being genuinely inclusive. But I also believe that what's coming is going to be quite radically distributed, that a lot of it will be operating on a local, sometimes even a hyperlocal basis, and that it's partly about much more serious efforts to adapt, to become resilient, because we are going to have to face and live through serious, terrible shit in the coming years and decades, because it has already been left too late, and because at COP26 in Glasgow this November, it is going to become clear to a lot of people who haven't already realized it, that our leaders are not planning to fix this.
Yeah. Well, I'd like for Shelley to join us now, but I would like to just comment, Rupert, on the profundity of what you're saying. I think at two levels. Number one, the stark realization that in the face of the most obvious fact in the world that our climate is changing, our governments and our elites, as it were, are not going to do anything about it because they're so focused on business as usual and the legitimation of a neoliberal economic system that maximizes profits to the exclusion of planet and people. And they're not going to let go of that. And what that means, number two, is that the people of the world, those of us here today on Humanity Rising, and we're in 130 countries around the world as we broadcast, the people of the world have to rise up, and they need to rise up in a way that is ruthlessly realistic about Code Red, brings in every aspect of human creativity, from direct action to moderate to whatever activity people feel inclined to engage in. It's all important now because every choice matters. And then, as you're saying, I guess would be number three, is that, you know, it's about what you call transformative adaptation, what we call regeneration, that we've got to now proactively enter into escalating climate turbulence with a view of both adapting to that, but also regenerating the ecosystem as much as possible, so that as the situation worsens, we can also be initiating a generative sort of counterpole that will help us organize more and more effectively as the climate continues to shift state. So all these will be discussed in more detail as we go through the COP, of course. And then, you know, your point that after the COP, the whole movement has to go through, I would say, a post-mortem. Where does this leave us? What do we do? And how do we collaborate strategically to get whatever it is that needs to be done completed in an expeditious and a powerful way.
Yes.
But Shelley, jump in here with any comment you want to make or a question to Rupert, or because you've been so deeply immersed in these issues.
So thank you for being here, Rupert. We really do appreciate it. All of this for me stirs up what the consequences are of inaction and how bad those consequences are going to continue to get. And the need to attempt to make things better in the face of knowing that we might fail.
Yes.
And really accepting that and bringing that in.
Mm.
Rupert, when you look at acting because it's too late, which you recently said,
Yeah.
and you look at that spiritual consciousness that we need to be evoking, courage in the face of failure. Can you expand a little bit on how you're seeing that, if that plays into how you're thinking about how we can orient ourselves to the situation that we're currently in?
Yeah, well, thank you, Shelley. Beautifully put as a question. So in terms of the spiritual basis for this, I'm just putting something in the chat which will give a longer version than we've got time for here, relevant to the question that you've asked. But briefly, the way I see it is this. As Jim said right at the start of this call, it's a wonderful thing to be alive at this moment. Why is it a wonderful thing to be alive when it's so kind of painful and difficult in many ways for those of us who are awake? Well, it's wonderful because if you are willing to actually fully face the reality of our situation, then that means that something deep shifts in you and things become possible for you that were not possible before. Forms of authentic relating that were not possible before. The kind of thing I was mentioning earlier that one experiences if one's involved in nonviolent direct action. The kind of thing that one experiences if one kind of fully immerses oneself in the fear that one has, or in the despair that one has. If one really allows those things to manifest rather than trying to keep them at arm's length, yeah, it's painful and it's difficult, but then it's liberating, because you realize, for example, that obeying the law is not as important as you thought. You realize that maybe planning for your retirement is not as important as you thought, depending somewhat on how old you are. You know, a key secret of the success of Greta Thunberg and of Extinction Rebellion, if you watch Greta's videos, or if you watch some of what I've tried to do in the media in the last few years, it's about authentic relating. It's about really resonating with the audience, sometimes really resonating with the person you're debating with or whatever, and achieving a level of humanity and authenticity that frankly environmentalists hadn't often managed to achieve before. And that is coming from this real facing up to reality, which is a kind of spiritual project. Yeah. That is coming from no longer denying one's despair and terror and so forth, and from realizing that all of this is really grounded in love. Yeah, that's why we feel this terrible grief. That's why we feel despair. That's why we feel such anger, because we love, because we're afraid for those we love, because we're grieving over the loss of species that we love, or people that we love. You know, there are already people dying all the time from climate and ecological degradation. And when you really allow yourself to feel those things, there's a power that becomes available, which was not available before. And I think the truth is that we've only just begun to tap that power. And that's one reason why I'm excited. In spiritual circles, we're often taught to really accept the present moment. And what I say is, truly accepting the present moment has to mean accepting it on the macro level and not just a micro level. And that means really accepting the state of the world. And that's a terrible thing to have to do if you've got open eyes. And the only way it can be not just terrible is if you really include in the state of the world as it is right now, your response to it. You don't try to suppress that. You allow yourself to fully feel and inhabit the terror, the grief, the despair, the anger, and the love that lies at the root of all of it. And when you do that, then incalculable things become possible. We don't know how huge those things are. There are things that are no longer possible. You know, it's not possible for us to make a simple, smooth transition anymore. It's not possible to save animals that have already gone extinct. You know, I'm not arguing for some kind of magical thinking where suddenly anything and everything becomes possible. But I am saying that things become possible that we barely even dare to dream of in terms of our power and in terms of the changes we're still capable of making. And that is how and why I believe that it is still possible that we're going to be able to transform this civilization and not have to go through the much greater horror of eco-driven collapse. And that is also why I think that if we do collapse, we may be able to do it in a relatively harm-free and intelligent way. So yeah, I hope that answers your huge question adequately, at least for now. That's the stakes here, and that's the kind of vastly kind of exciting and encouraging possibility that all of this, I think, opens up. And that again is why, you know, it's a gift. It's such a tremendous thing to be present when all of this is possible.
Thank you very much for that answer. It's only when we admit what we're feeling that we realize other people are feeling the same way.
That's right.
I felt
so right.
very lonely for a long time reading, you know, A Farewell to Ice and reading and feeling like I was seeing something that people would judge me for seeing.
Yeah.
What is the matter with you? And there's power and vulnerability when you can sit and say it, and then other people have the opportunity to say it back to you. And I really think that that's the genesis of action. That's the genesis of, this is real. We're feeling it. We can allow each other to feel it. Yeah. And then we can do something.
And if you face it together, it's so much easier, you know. Don't go through this on your own. And I would say also that a virtual community is not enough. A virtual community is brilliant, but you need to be doing this and having some of these conversations with real flesh and blood people as well. I think that's necessary part of it.
Well, Rupert, I know you have a hard stop in a minute or two. So I want to just thank you for taking the time with us today. It's been very important. And really, this opens up now for Humanity Rising, everyone, really the next 6 weeks, because we're going to start to be preparing each day. We'll be talking about different aspects of the COP and what we have in store for a global regeneration summit, as we're calling it, on the Humanity Rising side. It's going to be a very exciting 12 days and throughput as we take very seriously the different matters that Rupert has been raising about the urgency, about the possibilities of a direct action, moderate flank, strategic alignment, and about transformative adaptation, regeneration, as humanity goes through the eye of the COP26 needle, but then comes out the other side in an empowered way, as Shelley's question indicated. I know you have to jump, Rupert.
I do have to go because I've got to go to a planning meeting for our team that are going to COP. So yeah, but I look forward to talking with you all again, and I'm going to be sort of checking in with you periodically during COP itself briefly, Jim, at I think it's 8:30 a.m. Californian time on hopefully every day if we can.
Yeah. So we'll be in touch, Rupert.
Great.
And thank you. Know you have to jump, and
Please
really
save
appreciate
the
your time.
chat for us, will you, Jim, and your team there? I'd love to see the chat, which I haven't been able to look at during this.
Yeah, we'll copy it and send it to you.
Superb. Bye-bye,
Thanks
everybody.
so much.
I'll see you again.
Bye. See you in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Well, that was Rupert Read, one of the great intellectuals of our time, someone who's got his finger on the pulse in a very, very powerful way. Was part of that beautiful flowering of Extinction Rebellion, was part of the direct action wing, is now taking leadership in a more expanding way, as you saw, with really exploring what the moderate flank means to the climate movement. And we've been having some very active discussions, Shelley and I and others, Leslie, Ed Muller, various people involved in Humanity Rising and the Global Regeneration Corps, is what would it look like? What would the world look like if Extinction Rebellion and all that it represents in terms of direct action would really come into a strategic formation with the Global Regeneration Corps, with Humanity Rising, with Generate Costa Rica, with Donut Economics, with the hundreds and thousands of other organizations and networks around the world. 11 days of global unity week, unify, all as what, just imagine if we could all come together at this moment, each one of us doing our own thing, but doing it in conscious collaboration. We would change the world because it's almost a certifiable fact that our governments won't do it, and neither will the major corporations, because they're so invested in the dying civilization. And that's why we've launched the Global Regeneration Corps, and we're seeking to build pods, as we're calling it, of regeneration first responders around the world. We've already got about 70 on our UBverse, and we've got another 50, 60 that are in formation. So it's a very exciting period. And anyone out there, if you represent an organization that wants to really come into a strategic formation with others, the Global Regeneration Corps is not an organization as much as it's a global call to action owned by everyone. You're welcome to do that. The globalregenerationcorps.com is the website. We'll put it in the chat in just a moment here. And then if you're interested as an individual or as a group in developing a pod of any kind of regeneration linked globally with other pods of regeneration first responders, go to the Global Regeneration Corps website. There's a place for you to sign up, and that we'll be in touch. So that over the next several weeks, 6 weeks or so, we're going to be building out what all this means and inviting you as an organization, as an individual or a group to participate with us so that we come out the other side of the COP on November 13th, transformed as a movement and empowered by a deeper intentionality for what needs to be done in the face of Code Red. But Shelley, why don't you kind of make a final comment after witnessing the dialogue, asking that very, very profound question. Is there anything that you want to add to any of this before we close?
I would just like to say that this is the moment for consciousness and politics to merge. So often, as a student of politics and political movements, I see them as secular pursuits with good reason. Because if it becomes a fundamentalist exercise in politics, that's a whole different thing. That's a theocracy, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is democratic processes tend to reject consciousness as an active factor. And they tend to be reductionist, particularly in the United States, to the almighty dollar. And so many decisions are driven by the dollar and not driven by the consciousness that's behind the focus on the dollar. So now is the moment where consciousness needs to arise and look at the political systems that it is embedded in, wherever it is around the world, and decide whether or not the energy spent to change the political system, since we're running out of time, or to build an alternative political system that is not connected to any one nation's approach. And the reason why I'm saying that is this: power abhors a vacuum. Power abhors a vacuum. And we know how serious the situation is. And we know how vulnerable governments are. That's why we're seeing the rise of fascism. We're seeing the rises of things that we're seeing. When that collapse starts coming, that I believe is coming, I wish I could believe in a completely transformed society. I don't necessarily believe that's true. I think you can transform pockets. And as we transform those pockets, we're creating an alternative system that runs alongside the current system, so that when the current system fails, there's something to step into that vacuum that is based on love and consciousness and cooperation and collaboration, that already has some ideas on food security, on food production, on economics, so that that system is already developing, while these systems that are failing to deal with the crisis are naturally going to collapse, because suddenly the emperor has no clothes and everyone figures out that, oh, they're not here to help. They're not here to help. They're here to sustain the capitalist system that got us into this mess in the first place. So that's my ultimate takeaway, is that consciousness and politics now merges, and in an ever shortening time to action, we have to choose carefully whether lobbying Congress to stop subsidies for oil, which I think is 100% great. That's wonderful. What are the odds that that effort is going to work and work in time? If you want to put your energy there, go for it. But just be conscious that that energy going into that old system, if you can transform it even a little bit, that's great. But if you only have a limited amount of energy and time, you also need to think about, what do I withdraw my consent from? What will I no longer participate in? What am I going to build in place of this thing that is unreformable? At what point do we make that decision? That's the critical decision, I think. That's ahead of all of us as we're beginning to work through after COP, when it fails, and I think it will. What do we do then? And where do we put our energy and our consciousness? And the pandemic was really amazingly good at one thing. And as horrifying as it's been, and as grief-stricken as many people are with losing individuals and family, it was the first time that as a globe, we were sent to our rooms to think. And so many people couldn't go to the mall anymore, and they couldn't go to a restaurant anymore. So they started taking walks with their dog. And they started appreciating the tree. And they started appreciating and reconnecting with something that many of us have never connected with since we were born. which was that sense of nature. It pulled that blindfold off, where people realized, oh my gosh, all we are is cogs in this huge machine. And there has to be more than life than that. People discovered, I mean, everyone was making fun of everybody for the sourdough starter, right? That was a big meme. It was a big joke. You know, you got your sourdough starter, you know, But people started baking bread. People started crocheting. People started doing things that they'd heard their grandmothers talk about back in the day, right? And so there is an opportunity with this fertile ground that the pandemic that Mother Gaia sent us to say, there's ground here. She's going to send another message, and it's going to be worse next time if we don't start getting it. So I think we need to listen to our mother, take the blindfolds off, figure out where consciousness begins, where politics begins, what that nexus is, and then make good choices about where we put our energy and what it is that we're going to build. So that's just my thoughts. Based on what I heard Rupert say and other things I've been thinking about.
Thank you, Shelley. You are so deeply wise. It's such a pleasure to be a colleague of yours building all this. Shelley, everyone, is at the heart of ubiquity of Humanity Rising, the Global Regeneration Corps, and has been a very stalwart and powerful partner for me as we seek to kind of steer all this into the future within the context of increasing contextual turbulence, I would say. So thank you so much, Shelley. Just as we close here, just a couple of comments in the chat. One is about the after chat session group, about 350 strong. Stan, let's talk. Maybe the after session chat can become one of the regeneration pods, and start to really work on something as part of the Global Regeneration Corps. We invite all of you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you would like to do, to go to globalregenerationcorps.com and sign up as an organization or as an individual. As Kurt Kruger just suggested, put the GRC website as a link onto your website. Start to think about live streaming the Humanity Rising sessions on your Facebook page. There's all kinds of ways that we can begin to synergize now, very simply, but consciously, as Shelley's saying. We've got to become conscious about our politics now, knowing that every choice we make, both for inaction, as she observed, and also for action, counts. That's what Code Red means. Every action counts. And the more we can come together with intentionality to regenerate the world, the better off we're going to be in terms of how we not only survive, but whether we can create islands of coherence in this rising sea of chaos and actually thrive as we move into the future. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station on Humanity Rising. Tomorrow we'll turn to the issue of health. But don't forget that starting today, we're going to be actively planning now, and I'll be referencing it almost every single day on Humanity Rising till November 1. And we're going to go into probably the most important 12 days, maybe of our lives so far. As the world takes 12 days, our governments come together in the midst of Code Red, and how we come out the other side will determine our destiny in a very fundamental manner. That's what's at stake. And it is such a joy to be with all of you and to know that Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University and the University of International Cooperation, Regenerate, all the groups that are represented, the hundreds of groups represented in Humanity Rising, we're all going through this together. And out of all the commotion and the hustle and bustle, I am sure a phoenix will rise that will do our children unto the 7 generations proud, that a few of us stood up at the critical moment and did the right thing. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the after chat, those of you who can join, and tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.